They always called me dependable, like it was a compliment. That's Alex, steady as a rock. It was the kind of praise that sits heavy in your mouth, sweet and ash. Steady meant invisible. Reliable meant permanent. For 29 years, I wore those words like a jacket nobody ever offered to return. My brother, Marcus, got the spotlight. Varsity captain in high school, class president, golden smile that could vault him right to the center of every holiday photo. Dad, Richard, applauded everything Marcus did. Mom, Linda, stitched his name into every letter that mattered. And me? I was the one who made sure the lights were on for their applause. I pick up the thread at a late November afternoon, soaked in that peculiar gray light that makes suburban lawns look like movie sets. My kids, Lily, 9, and Noah, 7, were at school. I was making coffee, folding a shirt, when Marcus dropped a crumpled printout on my kitchen island like it belonged to him. Cover my son's college, he said, casual as you'd ask for the remote. He thumbed through the lines as if they were nothing more than grocery items. It's 15 grand, dorm deposit, textbooks, laptop. You know how these things go. He stretched his arm behind his head and grinned. You could see the future he believed in. Mine. After Christmas dinner, he'll pay, I heard him tell Dad over the phone. That same week, low and confident, like it was already done. Dad's voice, the reply, was colder than the November wind. That's his role. He'll handle it. I listened to them like a ghost roamed its own house. I listened until a slow, steady current of something hard and clear settled under my ribs. Betrayal feels different when you discover it piecemeal. It's paper cuts across decades. Not dramatic, but it accumulates until you can't ignore the bleeding. The pattern was unmistakable if you finally start looking for it. Their birthdays were always a spectacle of other people's money. My kids got homemade pancakes, while Marcus's kids unwrapped Bluetooth headphones on matching placemats. Dad's smile when the check arrived was a small, practiced thing, expectant, certain. That's your role, he'd say with a shrug that cut like glass. When I tried to protest, the room would constrict. Don't be difficult, my mother would whisper. Moral pressure disguised as family. That printout wasn't the first time they'd leaned on me, but it was the first time someone said it out loud, like a verdict. After Christmas dinner, he'll pay. They weren't asking. They were stating. A plan that folded me into it without my consent. I could have exploded. I could have screamed and ripped the tablecloth and called them thieves and traitors. But I'm not that kind of climactic. I'm quieter. I plot in small, precise lines. I plan like a person who fixed engines in college and taught herself to read contracts on midnight shifts. For 2 weeks I smiled and nodded. I baked my mother's pecan pie the way she likes it. I agreed to bring the mashed potatoes. I RSVP'd yes to the Christmas dinner. They had no idea they were walking into a reconfigured play. Step 1. Logistics. Christmas dinner this year was not going to happen at their house. I canceled the catering I'd set up for everyone else. I returned the party rentals I'd booked. The tables, the linens, the heater for the backyard. I rescheduled the florist appointment and donated the half-ordered wine to a community kitchen. To them, I was simply forgetting things, being infuriating in the way only family can be. Step 2. Sever the strings. For years my accounts were a web with my name stitched into everyone else's seams. Auto payments lined up like obedient ducks. Dad's car loan, Mom's electrical bills, Marcus's mortgage when his income stalled during that year he started a business that never quite launched. I called the bank, and then the other bank, and then the third. I sat on hold and read contracts until the letters blurred. I changed routing numbers, canceled authorizations, removed my name as co-signer wherever I still signed away my independence. It felt less like stealing, and more like someone finally closing a door that had always been open to them without question. Step 3. Legal safety. I wasn't reckless. I got a lawyer to run a quick sweep of any obligations they might try to force back onto me. Minute fees, joint liabilities, anything that could come roaring back like a bad dog. The lawyer, a blunt woman named Carmen who smelled of coffee and certainty, printed out tidy stacks of forms for me to sign. She told me, bluntly, people like your family get complacent. They'll try to weaponize that complacency. We made those weapons unusable. Step 4. The reveal. Not revenge as a blow,
but as a quiet unmasking. I knew the moment would be most corrosive on a day they expected power, so I planned everything for December 25th.
On the morning of Christmas, my house looked modest and warm. The tree was up, not perfect but alive. I wrapped board games and good hardcover novels and matching sweaters for my kids, gifts that smelled like Sundays. I cleaned the house myself. I put out candles. No grand gestures, no social media ready spreads. I wanted authenticity. The kind they always lectured me was uncomplicated. They arrived in waves. Marcus with his easy laugh and a bag of dessert he'd forgotten he'd brought. Dad with an expectant grin that assumed I'd play my assigned role. Mom with her small, betrayed look that always came when someone besides me received a shining piece of attention. They stepped into my living room and looked for the orchestra conductor they expected to find, the person who would pull the strings and pay the tab. Instead, I handed each of them a plain white envelope. Inside, the legal notices, the statements showing account closures, the canceled auto-renew forms, the bank statements with new routing and the stamped authorization terminated marks. It was all there, black on white, cold and impossible to spin into a joke. For a beat, they laughed. You could see it play out. Disbelief, then denial, then the thin edge of something like panic slicing through theatrics. Dad's grin melted into a shape I recognized. Not the politician who'd run meetings, but a man in the middle of a road he hadn't known he would have to drive alone. "What is this?" Marcus snapped, folding one of the notices as if he could crease the truth out of it. "It's what I chose," I said. My voice was steady, my hands were not. "You all decided what my role was a long time ago. You didn't consult me." "You're screwing us," Marcus said. Anger flared like a flare gun. He thought this was about money. He wasn't wrong. Money was the instrument, but not the motive. Money had been the language they used to make me obey. This was about taking back the language. "They tried guilt first. We raised you," Dad said, his voice a thin reed. "You owe us." "You raised me. You knew what you were doing," I said. "You decided I was the one who would always step up. You never asked whether I wanted that." The words landed like a verdict. I told them what I'd overheard. After Christmas dinner, he'll pay. I watched the faces change color the way fruit does when it's dropped. The casual conspirators were exposed. They begged. They cursed. My brother tried to make me the villain. A melodramatic, deliciously familiar move. "You made us look like beggars," he cried. Beggars. The word sat oddly on his tongue. He'd made a fashion of entitlement his entire life. He'd never liked to stand in line. He wanted others to file his place for him. I shut the door on their chaos and went inside the room where my children sat. My kids were an anchor in this storm. Unassuming, whole. Lily was playing with a puzzle. Noah had already started on a book. ... Gifts lay unopened in generous, imperfect piles. There was a warmth in their little faces that no amount of scandal could peel away. For the first time in years, my holiday tasted like something I had chosen, and not something I had been made to perform. The first week after Christmas was lit with texts and voicemail apologies, the litany you get when someone discovers they've lost privilege. Dad called in the middle of the night, the old family powerlessness in his voice. He tried to bargain, to manipulate, to remind me of history like a ledger. I listened until the lines in his voice ran thin. Marcus alternated between rage and posture. Mom cried herself into my machine phone. Small soprano tears full of a lifetime of habit. Then they began to act like addicts. People who are accustomed to everyone else maintaining their comfort will do strange things when the comfort is gone. Marcus tried to borrow from cousins. He called old friends. He hustled garage sale flips. Dad, for all his projection and puffed chest, learned what a bureaucratic hold looked like when he had to actually file forms himself. There was humility in the slow, grinding friction of learning to handle one's own bills. But there was also vindictiveness, the kind I knew how to guard against because I'd seen it in 1,000 small humiliations. They tried to rally the family, paint me as cold, ungrateful. "You won't believe what Alex did," texted Marcus, with a flourish meant to drum up sympathy. He forgot that the family we had was more rumor than truth. Social pressure is effective until someone actually bothers to read the receipts. I did not flinch when they started turning neighbors into allies. Instead, I did something I rarely did. I showed my face. I invited people over. I hosted small dinners and asked nothing of anyone. I volunteered at the school. I went to Lily's soccer game and cheered, like a person who had finally decided that being seen was part of my life, not a burden to be managed. When money was mentioned in public, I replied like a person who owned the concept of her life. "We're fine," I would say. That was true. The thing they'd assumed, that I could not live without being their bank, was false. I'd been careful. I had savings, yes, a modest retirement account, a health plan I paid for, credit lines I monitored. I am not wealthy, but I am not bankrupt of options either. I was only bankrupt of illusions about them. About 6 months later, something else happened. Marcus's startup, the one that had been a string of excuses and grand spreadsheets, actually earned a small contract. He came to me, hat in hand. "I need help with payroll," he said, which was a softer version of everything he'd asked before. This time the ask was precise, honest. He wasn't asking me to be his permanent safety net. He was asking me to help him through a specific crisis and proposed a plan to repay. There's an old idea that revenge is a catastrophic flourish. My revenge was not a headline. It didn't involve the cinematic destruction of a man's car or making someone suffer with hunger. My revenge, if you could even call it that, was a reclamation of borders. I didn't want to ruin them. I wanted to make the cost of taking me for granted too obvious to continue. So I helped on terms. Carmen, my lawyer, drew up a short-term loan agreement for Marcus. Clear repayment schedule, interest, collateral in the form of his business assets. He signed it. We automated payments. If he defaulted, the agreement triggered resources for counseling and workforce training. It was merciful in its precision. Dad came around too, slowly. Pride makes people slow learners about vulnerability. He took volunteer shifts at the community center, learned to cook for a fundraiser, realized the satisfaction of contributing without the expectation of someone else doing it for him. My mother, who had been threaded into the family's old scripts, found herself teaching weekly art classes to kids in our town. There's something practical about making something with your hands that breaks the habit of reaching. I am not naive. This was not a perfect resurrection. Harboring resentment is like holding a small stone in your shoe. It grates. There were moments when I wondered if I had forgiven because I needed to, or because I had simply negotiated a more convenient life. There were moments when Marcus would revert to old tactics, and I'd have to remind him we'd not signed back into that arrangement. People ask me often, in the months since, whether revenge tasted sweet. It's a tidy metaphor, revenge as dessert. But the truth is less satisfying and more precise. Revenge tasted like silence. Not the hungry silence of having cracked someone over the knuckles. Not the dramatic hush of a room waiting for applause. The silence I mean is the calm when someone finally stops demanding something from you that you never agreed to give. It's the quiet where you can hear your children laugh without the calculations in the back of your mind. It's the space where you can decide how much love is enough without a ledger. There was a final twist, a small, private victory that I keep like a pressed flower in the book of my life. At a town charity gala the following spring, Marcus took the stage to speak about his company's new socially conscious initiative. He talked about accountability, about ethical leadership, all words he hadn't always embodied. I sat in the audience with Lily and Noah, who were munching on carrots and cheering louder than the grown-ups. After his speech, he came over to me and hugged me, the way only a brother can when he means it, messy, sincere. "Thank you," he said into my hair, "for not letting me fall and for not letting me stay down." I believed him in that moment. I believed he meant it. And in believing him, I learned something about myself. Revenge had not reshaped him.
It had carved a space for mutual responsibility to grow, and that, I decided, was worth more than any petty satisfaction. So here I am, not triumphant in the theatrical sense, but steady in a new way. The jacket of dependable still fits, but it's different now, tailored by my hands. I still fix broken things. I still balance budgets and mend fences. Only now I do it for people who ask, and for myself. I keep the accounts clear. I answer the calls, but I don't accept the terms that make me invisible. People tell me what I did was cold. Some say I should have forgiven earlier. Others call it practical, necessary. The truest thing is simpler. I reclaimed my life with small, deliberate acts. I severed the autopay. I read the fine print.
I set boundaries like fences that keep a garden alive. And when Christmas came again, we had a modest dinner. The table smelled like rosemary and slow-roasted chicken and cinnamon. Dad brought a store-bought pie he'd made himself. Surprised the family by admitting his crust needed work. Marcus showed up with a batch of cookies. No grand gestures, just presents. My kids tore into their board games and shouted over the rules. It was imperfect and real. The most honest holiday I've ever had. I didn't become a villain. I didn't become a martyr. I simply stopped being their bank. I closed the accounts that had made me feel secondary in my own life. In the quiet that followed, in the space between their expectation and my refusal, I found something that felt like mercy. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I wanted to live fully in a world where I could choose my own role. Revenge, as it turned out, was not about making them pay. It was about making them notice me as a person who could say no. And once they noticed, everything, finally, shifted.